The office after hours had its own kind of silence, not peaceful, but heavy. The hum of computers, the faint ticking of a clock, the flicker of fluorescent light that made everything feel too still. The kind of silence that made you realize just how alone you were. Everyone else had gone home hours ago. The cleaners had already come and gone, leaving behind the smell of lemon spray and paperwork. My monitor was the only light left in the room, white, cold, and endless. I told myself I stayed late because of the deadlines. Because ambition mattered. But that wasn't true. I stayed because home didn't feel like home anymore. My husband and I barely talked these days. When he did speak, it was about work, bills, things that didn't matter. I couldn't remember the last time he asked how I felt. Maybe he just stopped noticing, or maybe I stopped trying to be noticed. The clock on my screen flashed 9:47 p.m. My eyes burned, and I stretched back in my chair. My reflection in the black glass of the window looked like someone I didn't recognize, tired, small, fading. Then a voice broke the quiet. "Still here?" It startled me. I turned and saw Daniel, my boss, leaning on the doorframe. His tie hung loose, his shirt sleeves rolled up. His voice sounded rough from the long day, but his smile was soft. "Couldn't sleep," I said. "So I figured I'd get ahead on the reports." He stepped inside, the sound of his shoes echoing against the tile floor. "I thought you might say that," he said, holding out a cup. "Coffee. Still warm." "I didn't ask for." "I know," he interrupted, "but you look like you needed it." I took it, my fingers brushing his for just a second. That tiny touch shouldn't have felt like anything. But it did. It lingered, quiet and electric, as if the room had suddenly changed temperature. He sat on the edge of the desk beside mine, looking out the window. "You work harder than anyone here. You ever stop?" I gave a short laugh, trying to sound casual. "If I did, I'd probably have to think about my life. So, no." He turned toward me. "Maybe that's exactly why you should." Something in his voice made me look up. He wasn't teasing. He wasn't being a boss. He was just seeing me. And I couldn't remember the last time someone did. The air between us felt different now, not romantic, not yet. But heavier. The kind of silence that asks questions you don't want to answer. I looked back at the screen, pretending to read the same line again and again. My heart was beating too loud. I didn't say it, but I knew one thing for sure, I wasn't staying late for the work anymore. He stayed. I thought he'd just drop off the coffee and leave, but he didn't. Instead, Daniel sat down at the desk across from mine, the one usually reserved for interns, and started tapping idly at the edge of my notebook. "You know," he said, glancing at the numbers on my screen, "you don't get a medal for saving this company every night." I smiled faintly, not looking up. Maybe I just like the quiet. He laughed once, low and genuine. "Nobody likes the quiet. They just pretend to." Then, after a pause, "What are you really avoiding?" The question hit harder than I expected. I froze. Because it wasn't small talk. It was too specific, too personal. "I'm not avoiding anything," I said, a little too quickly. He leaned back, studying me for a moment. "That's what people say right before they tell me what they're actually avoiding." His tone wasn't teasing anymore. It was soft. Patient. And for some reason, that made it worse. I sighed, fingers tracing the rim of my coffee cup. "It's not important. Try me." I looked at him, really looked, and suddenly the words just came out. "I used to love what I do. Now it's just routine. I go home, eat, sleep, and start over. My husband barely notices when I'm there. And here." I gestured at the monitor, at the files, at the fluorescent ceiling. "At least someone does." He didn't say anything. Just nodded, slow, deliberate, like someone who understood that kind of emptiness. After a moment, he said quietly, You deserve more than being invisible, you know. Something in me flinched, not because it was inappropriate, but because it sounded like the truth. And truths are dangerous when you hear them at the wrong time, from the wrong person. The room felt warmer suddenly, too close. He looked down, then back up, eyes steady. I shouldn't say that, he added softly. But I meant it. I didn't reply. I couldn't. Because for the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel invisible anymore. The air felt heavier after that. Not awkward, just full of something unspoken. The kind of silence where one wrong move could change everything. Daniel stood up and stretched, his tie hanging loosely around his neck. You've been staring at that spreadsheet for 3 hours, he said. That's not productivity, that's self-punishment. I laughed, though it came out more like a sigh. I'm not sure I remember the difference. He smiled, walked toward his office, then paused at the doorway. You ever had wine in an office before? I looked up, confused. Is that a trick question? He tilted his head. No trick. Just, it's Friday, we both survived another week. I keep a bottle in my cabinet for emergencies. He gave me that half smile again. And this feels like one. Part of me wanted to say no, to stay behind the safety of my screen. But another part, the tired, forgotten part, whispered why not? 5 minutes later, we were sitting on the small couch in his office. The lights were dimmed, city lights pouring through the window behind him. He poured 2 glasses, the sound of wine filling the silence. To surviving, he said, lifting his glass. I hesitated, then clinked it softly. To surviving. The first sip burned slightly, cheap wine, but warm somehow. We talked about work, then about everything except work, music, travel, the people we used to be before responsibility swallowed us whole. And the more he spoke, the more I realized, I'd forgotten what it felt like to be interesting to someone. At some point, he looked at me and smiled, a little too long. You have this habit, he said quietly, of talking about everyone else, your husband, your coworkers, but never yourself. I raised a brow. Maybe I just don't think I'm that interesting. He leaned forward, voice lower now. You're wrong. It wasn't the words. It was the way he said them, like a fact, not a compliment. The room seemed smaller suddenly. The space between us shorter. And for the first time that night, I forgot there were walls, rules, consequences. The bottle was half empty by then. The laughter came easier, the pauses longer. Outside the window, the city blurred into gold and silver lights, reflected in the glass like another world, one where people made fewer mistakes. I'd taken off my blazer somewhere between the jokes and the stories. My hair had fallen loose from its clip. For once, I didn't care how I looked. Daniel leaned back on the couch, his tie gone completely, sleeves rolled to his elbows. He looked different. Not like my boss. Not like someone I should have trusted this much. You know, he said after a moment, I don't think I've ever seen you laugh like this. I smiled faintly, swirling the last of the wine in my glass. That's because I don't, usually. He tilted his head. That's a shame. Why? Because it suits you. I tried to brush it off with a laugh, but something about the way he said it, slow, deliberate, made my chest tighten. He didn't sound like a man making a move. He sounded like someone noticing a secret. I shifted in my seat, crossing one leg over the other. You shouldn't say things like that. Why not? Because you're my boss. He smiled again, softer this time. And you're my employee. Not my enemy. His gaze lingered just a little too long. And when I finally met his eyes, the air between us felt like static, silent, charged, impossible to ignore. He leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees. Can I tell you something without it sounding inappropriate? I hesitated, heartbeat loud in my ears. Depends what it is. You're the most composed person I know. But sometimes I see the way your hands shake when you're typing. And I can't help wondering what you're holding in. I didn't know what to say. No one had ever noticed that before. Not my husband. Not anyone. He looked down, then back up. His voice was quieter now, almost careful. You deserve to be seen, you know. Not just tolerated. My throat tightened. And before I could stop myself, I whispered, I don't even remember what that feels like. His eyes softened, no words, no touch, just that look. The kind that makes time slow down and reason disappear. And in that moment, sitting there under the low office lights, I realized something terrifying. I didn't want the night to end. The room had gone quiet again. That strange, suspended kind of quiet where even your heartbeat feels too loud. Daniel stood up first, walking toward the shelf behind his desk. I should probably get us some water, he said with a half smile. Before we pretend this counts as dinner. I watched him move, slow, unhurried, the kind of confidence that came from never needing to rush. He poured the water, then turned, setting the glass in front of me. But as he did, a folder slipped from the edge of the desk, scattering papers across the floor. We both knelt at once. Our hands reached for the same page, and met halfway. It was nothing. A moment. A touch that should have lasted a second and been forgotten. But it didn't end. His fingers brushed mine again, this time slower, deliberate enough that it wasn't an accident anymore. The warmth of his skin sent a shiver up my arm, something I couldn't explain, or maybe didn't want to. When I looked up, he was already watching me. Not with hunger, not yet, but with something more dangerous. Recognition. I froze, breath caught halfway between sense and surrender. We were still kneeling, still too close, the sound of the city fading behind the glass. He spoke first, voice low. I shouldn't. I know, I interrupted. But neither of us moved. The air between us was heavy, charged, thick with everything we hadn't said all night. And then, quietly, he took the paper from my hand, his touch lingering just a second too long. I stood up, pretending to focus on the mess of files, though my pulse was pounding in my ears. I could still feel the warmth of his hand on mine. And it was the first real thing I'd felt in months. For a while, neither of us said anything. The only sound in the room was the soft buzz of the ceiling light and the faint hum of the city outside. Daniel picked up the last of the papers, stacking them neatly, as if pretending order could hide what had just happened. But his hands moved slower now, deliberate, careful, like even touching the desk meant remembering me. I leaned against the edge of the couch, trying to breathe normally, though my pulse was anything but. It felt wrong to stay, but somehow, leaving felt worse. He looked up at me then. And everything, the files, the clock, the walls, seemed to disappear. That look wasn't casual, or curious, or even kind. It was raw. Honest. The kind of look that strips away the version of yourself you show the world. Come here, he said softly. It wasn't a command. It was a request, quiet, uncertain, like he was afraid of what might happen if I said yes. For a moment, I didn't move. But my body did before my mind caught up. One step. Then another. The air between us tightened with every inch. We were standing close enough now that I could smell his cologne, faint, familiar, like cedar and coffee. Close enough to see the lines at the corners of his eyes, the tiredness that matched mine. He raised his hand, not to touch, just to brush a strand of hair from my face. But his fingers stopped halfway, hovering, trembling slightly. I should have stepped back. I should have said something, anything, to break the moment before it broke me. But instead, I whispered. Daniel. He looked at me, I searching mine for permission I couldn't give, but didn't take away. And in that suspended second, with the office lights dim and the world asleep outside, I realized something simple and terrifying. We were already past the point of no return. Time didn't stop, but it felt like it wanted to. The hum of the lights, the faint echo of the street below, everything faded until there was only us. He was still standing close, his hand halfway between hesitation and touch. I could feel the heat of it near my cheek, close enough to know what would happen if I leaned in, and what it would mean if I didn't. My heartbeat filled the silence. I opened my mouth to say something, anything, but the words just didn't come. Because there was nothing left to say. When he finally touched me, it wasn't rushed or hungry. It was slow, careful, like we were both afraid the moment would shatter if we breathed too loudly. His fingers brushed along my jaw, trailing up to my hair, and suddenly the air between us disappeared completely. The kiss wasn't deep. It wasn't planned. It was just quiet, desperate in its stillness. The kind that says we both knew this was coming. For a second, I thought I'd pull away. But instead, I stepped closer. His hand moved to my back, steady, grounding, as if holding me there was the only real thing left in the world. The room seemed to tilt, the lights flickered against the glass behind us. I could taste the wine, the exhaustion, the danger, all at once. When I finally pulled away, I didn't look at him. I didn't have to. I already knew we'd crossed a line we couldn't uncross. He said my name once, quietly, almost like an apology. And then there was only silence again, heavy and fragile. Like the pause before a storm that's already begun. Morning came too early. The light through the blinds was pale and cold, the kind that makes everything look sharper than you want it to. For a few seconds, I didn't know where I was. The couch beneath me felt strange, the air too still. Then I saw the desk, his desk, the papers scattered, one heel on the floor beside it, his jacket draped over my legs like a blanket. My stomach turned. Not because of what had happened, but because of how natural it felt in that moment, like something that was supposed to happen, and that made it worse. Daniel was sitting by the window, already dressed, a cup of coffee in his hand. He didn't look at me right away. The silence between us was thick, alive, full of all the things neither of us knew how to say. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. "You don't have to explain anything." I sat up slowly, pulling the jacket tighter around me. My throat ached. My mind searched for something to hold on to, an excuse, a reason, a lie. There wasn't one. He turned toward me, eyes tired. "You should go before the office opens." I nodded, but my body didn't move. I wanted to tell him I regretted it. I wanted to tell him I didn't. But the truth was, both were equally true. He stood, walked over, and set the coffee on the table beside me. Then, without a word, he touched my shoulder, soft, brief, almost like a goodbye. And just like that, the night before became something that no longer belonged to either of us. Only the silence did. I dressed quietly, my hands trembling, every sound too loud, the zipper, the click of my heels, the door. As I left his office, I caught a glimpse of myself in the glass wall, hair messy, eyes hollow, wearing the same clothes as yesterday. It hit me then, simple and cruel. This was who I'd become. Not the woman in control. Not the loyal wife. Just someone who'd gone too far. And didn't know how to come back. Home smelled like coffee and clean laundry. It was almost cruel, how normal everything felt. The sun spilled across the kitchen counter, my husband's jacket hung neatly by the door. For a moment, I just stood there, staring at the life I'd built, the one that suddenly didn't fit anymore. He turned from the stove when he heard me come in. "You were up late again," he said, smiling tiredly. "Rough night?" His voice, familiar, steady, should have grounded me. Instead, it hollowed me out. "Yeah," I whispered. "Just work." He crossed the room and kissed my forehead. It was simple, soft, ordinary, the kind of affection I used to crave. And now, it felt like a lie I wasn't strong enough to stop telling. "I missed you," he said. "It's been weird not having dinner together lately." The words hit harder than they should have. He said them so casually, unaware that the person he was missing wasn't coming back. I nodded, forcing a smile. "I missed you too." But my voice cracked at the end. I covered it with a cough, turned away, and busied myself with the mug on the counter. My hand shook so badly I nearly dropped it. He didn't notice. Or maybe he just didn't want to. He kept talking about his day, a client meeting, a funny story from work. And I stood there nodding, pretending to listen. While the sound of his voice made my chest ache with guilt I couldn't hide anymore. He looked so calm, so content in his small world of routine and trust. And I'd shattered mine in one night. When he wrapped his arms around me, I didn't pull away, but I couldn't breathe either. Because for the first time since it happened, I realized something terrifying. I wasn't sorry for the night. I was sorry for everything that came before it. For the emptiness that made it possible. Days blurred together after that. Work, dinner, sleep, repeat. But everything felt slower now. Like the world had learned what I did and was giving me time to drown in it. My husband didn't notice at first. Or maybe he did, but chose to pretend he didn't. He still asked about my day, still made coffee the way I liked it, 2 sugars, no milk, still kissed me goodbye in the mornings. But something had changed. It wasn't him. It was me. Every time he touched me, my body tensed, not because I didn't love him, but because I didn't know how to. Not after Daniel. Not after the way that night made me remember what it felt like to be seen. One evening, while he was watching TV, I caught my reflection in the dark window again. Same house. Same woman. But I looked like a stranger, someone caught between 2 lives and belonging to neither. "Are you okay?" he asked suddenly, eyes still on the screen. "I'm fine," I said. It was a lie. It had become my favorite one. He smiled a little. "You've been quiet lately." I wanted to tell him everything. To confess, to cry, to beg for something I couldn't even name. But I didn't. Because the truth would destroy the version of me he still believed in. So instead, I said the one thing that always worked. "Just tired." He nodded, accepting it. And that hurt the most, how easy it was for him to believe me. Later that night, I lay beside him in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to his breathing. His arm rested over me, warm, steady, like a promise I'd already broken. And for the first time, I realized that guilt doesn't fade. It just finds a quieter place to live. Monday came, like it always did. Too bright. Too loud. Too normal for how wrong everything felt inside me. When I walked into the office, the hum of printers and keyboards sounded almost cruel. People laughed in the hallway, phones rang, coffee machines hissed, life went on, as if nothing had happened. But I had. Daniel was already there. His door was open, blinds half closed, light spilling across the carpet in thin lines. For a moment, I thought about walking past, pretending he wasn't there. But pretending was all I'd done lately. He looked up when I stopped by the doorway. Just a glance, quick, unreadable. Not anger, not regret. Just distance. "Morning," I said quietly. "Morning," he replied, his voice calm, professional, untouched. The kind of voice that says we're not talking about it. I forced a smile. "Do you need me to finish the client report today?" "Yes," he said. "By noon, if possible." That was it. No hesitation. No warmth. Just the man I used to know, or maybe the man I never did. I turned to leave, but he spoke again. "About the other night." He paused, his tone steady but low. "It can't happen again." I didn't answer right away. Because what do you say to that? To the moment that changed everything and suddenly means nothing? "I know," I said finally. Our eyes met for half a second, just long enough to remember, too long to forget. Then I walked out. The rest of the day moved like a dream I couldn't wake up from. Emails, meetings, polite smiles, all of it mechanical. But every time I caught a glimpse of his office door, my chest tightened. At lunch, I saw him laughing with someone from marketing, his hand brushing against hers as he passed her a file. It shouldn't have bothered me. But it did. And that's when it hit me. What happened between us wasn't love, wasn't connection. It was just a moment of weakness that looked too much like comfort. And now, every time I walked into that office, I had to face the one thing I couldn't file away, delete, or fix. The version of myself that I left in his hands. Weeks passed. Nothing dramatic, nothing loud, just time moving forward, dragging me with it. The world didn't end. It never does. It just keeps turning, even when you wish it wouldn't. At work, everything looked the same. Daniel barely spoke to me outside of meetings. When he did, it was all surface, numbers, deadlines, polite nods. Sometimes I caught him glancing at me when he thought I wasn't looking. But we both pretended those moments didn't exist. At home, my husband still made coffee every morning. Still kissed me on the cheek before leaving. Still said I love you like it was routine, like it was something we both had memorized years ago. And I played my part. Perfectly. But every night, when I lay awake beside him, I thought about that version of myself in Daniel's office. The one who wanted to be seen. The one who mistook attention for affection. And loneliness for love. One evening, I stayed late again. Old habits. Or maybe punishment. The office was empty, quiet, the same way it was that first night. I stood by the window, watching the city lights flicker far below. My reflection looked back, tired eyes, steady hands, someone finally learning how to breathe again. And it hit me then. What I'd done wasn't about Daniel. It wasn't even about my husband. It was about me. About the woman who had built her life around everyone else's needs until she forgot her own. The woman who kept waiting for someone to notice her pain instead of facing it herself. I thought the affair would make me feel alive. Instead, it showed me how far I'd drifted from the person I used to be. I finished my work, turned off the lights, and walked out of the office. For the first time, not to escape, but to begin again. Outside, the air was cool. The city was loud and alive. And for once, so was I.